Starting in 1954, Oppenheimer lived for several months of each year on the island of St. John in the U.S. Virgin Islands. In 1957, he purchased a 2-acre (81 hectare) tract of land on Gibney Beach, where he built a Spartan home on the beach. He spent a considerable amount of time sailing with his daughter Toni and wife Kitty. Oppenheimer's first public appearance following the stripping of his security clearance was a lecture titled, Prospects in the Arts and Sciences, for the Columbia University Bicentennial Radio show Man's Right to Knowledge, in which he outlined his philosophy and his thoughts on the role of science in the modern world. He had been selected for the final episode of the lecture series 2 years prior to the security hearing, though the university remained adamant that he stay on even after the controversy. In February 1955, the president of the University of Washington, Henry Schmitz, abruptly cancelled an invitation to Oppenheimer to deliver a series of lectures there. Schmitz's decision caused an uproar among the students. 1,200 of them signed a petition protesting the decision, and Schmitz was burned in effigy. While they marched in protest, the state of Washington outlawed the Communist Party and required all government employees to swear a loyalty oath. Edwin Albrecht Euling, the chairman of the physics department and a colleague of Oppenheimer's from Berkeley, appealed to the university senate, and Schmitz's decision was overturned by a vote of 56 to 40. Oppenheimer stopped briefly in Seattle to change planes on a trip to Oregon, and was joined for coffee during his layover by several University of Washington faculty. But Oppenheimer never lectured there. Oppenheimer was increasingly concerned about the potential danger that scientific inventions could pose to humanity. He joined with Albert Einstein, Bertrand Russell, Joseph Rotblat and other eminent scientists and academics to establish what would eventually, in 1960, become the World Academy of Art and Science. Significantly, after his public humiliation, he did not sign the major open protests against nuclear weapons of the 1950s, including the Russell-Einstein Manifesto of 1955. Nor, though invited, did he attend the first Pugwash conferences on science and world affairs in 1957. In his speeches and public writings, Oppenheimer continually stressed the difficulty of managing the power of knowledge in a world in which the freedom of science to exchange ideas was more and more hobbled by political concerns. Oppenheimer delivered the Wreath Lectures on the BBC in 1953, which were subsequently published as Science and the Common Understanding. In 1955, Oppenheimer published The Open Mind, a collection of 8 lectures that he had given since 1946 on the subject of nuclear weapons and popular culture. Oppenheimer rejected the idea of nuclear gunboat diplomacy, the purposes of this country in the field of foreign policy. He wrote, cannot in any real or enduring way be achieved by coercion. In 1957, the philosophy and psychology departments at Harvard invited Oppenheimer to deliver the William James Lectures, an influential group of Harvard alumni led by Edwin Ginn that included Archibald Roosevelt, protested the decision. 1,200 people attended Oppenheimer's 6 lectures, The Hope of Order, in Sanders Theater. In 1962, Oppenheimer delivered the Whedon Lectures at McMaster University, which were published in 1964 as The Flying Trapeze. 3 Crises for Physicists. Deprived of political power, Oppenheimer continued to lecture, write and work on physics. He toured Europe and Japan, giving talks about the history of science, the role of science in society, and the nature of the universe. Oppenheimer spoke about the importance of studying the history of science at the dedication of the Niels Bohr Library and Archives of the American Institute of Physics in September 1963. In September 1957, France made him an officer of the Legion of Honor. And on May 3, 1962, he was elected a foreign member of the Royal Society in Britain. At the urging of many of Oppenheimer's political friends who had ascended to power, President John F. Kennedy awarded Oppenheimer the Enrico Fermi Award in 1963 as a gesture of political rehabilitation. Teller, the winner of the previous year's award, had also recommended Oppenheimer receive it, in the hope that it would heal the rift between them. A little over a week after Kennedy's assassination, his successor, President Lyndon Johnson, presented Oppenheimer with the award for contributions to theoretical physics as a teacher and originator of ideas, and for leadership of the Los Alamos Laboratory and the atomic energy program during critical years. Oppenheimer told Johnson, "I think it is just possible, Mr. President, that it has taken some charity and some courage for you to make this award today." The rehabilitation implied by the award was partly symbolic, as Oppenheimer still lacked a security clearance and could have no effect on official policy. But the award came with a $50,000 tax-free stipend. And its award outraged many prominent Republicans in Congress. The late President Kennedy's widow Jacqueline, still living in the White House, made it a point to meet with Oppenheimer to tell him how much her husband had wanted him to have the medal. While still a senator in 1959, Kennedy had been instrumental in voting to narrowly deny Oppenheimer's enemy Louis Strauss a coveted government position as Secretary of Commerce, effectively ending Strauss's political career. This was partly due to lobbying by the scientific community on behalf of Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer was a chain smoker and was diagnosed with throat cancer in late 1965. After inconclusive surgery, he underwent unsuccessful radiation treatment and chemotherapy late in 1966. He fell into a coma on February 15, 1967, and died at his home in Princeton, New Jersey, on February 18, aged 62. A memorial service was held a week later at Alexander Hall on the campus of Princeton University. The service was attended by 600 of his scientific, political and military associates that included Bethany Groves, Kennan, Lilienthal, Rabi, Smith and Weiner. His brother Frank and the rest of his family were there, as was the historian Arthur M. Schlesinger, Jr., the novelist John O. Hara, and George Balanchine, the director of the New York City Ballet. Bethany, Kennan and Smith gave brief eulogies. Oppenheimer's body was cremated and his ashes placed in an urn. His wife took the ashes to St. John and dropped the urn into the sea, within sight of the beach house. In October 1972, Kitty died aged 62 from an intestinal infection complicated by a pulmonary embolism. Oppenheimer's ranch in New Mexico was then inherited by their son Peter, and the beach property was inherited by their daughter Catherine, Toni Oppenheimer Silber. Toni was refused security clearance for her chosen vocation as a United Nations translator after the FBI brought up the old charges against her father. In January 1977, 3 months after the end of her second marriage, she hanged herself in her family beach house. She left the property to the people of St. John for a public park and recreation area. The original house was built too close to the coast and succumbed to a hurricane. Today the Virgin Islands government maintains a community center in the area.